So you bought a can of sardines. Now what? Well, I'm going to share a recipe with you today that is absolutely delicious and very easy to prepare, and I think will be liked by even those who think they don't like sardines. Hi, sweet friends. I'm Mary, and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferments, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel. And don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. If you're in the process of making the transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, you may be stocking your pantry with foods that are very new to you. Now, some of those foods, although new to your pantry, may be a little more familiar to you, such as dried beans. And once you soak and cook dried beans, it's a very familiar food. It's just beans. But stocking canned fish in your pantry may be another matter. Now, you may be used to having a couple of cans of tuna fish in your pantry, but if you can't find them and you look to other canned fish, you're going to find sardines and kippers and anchovies on your grocery store shelves. But if you've never used them, what do you do with them? And also, just in general, as you are making that transition from a processed foods kitchen to a more traditional foods kitchen, you're wanting to incorporate a variety of canned fish into your diet. Fish like sardines and kippers and anchovies are small fish, and they're generally wild caught, and they're often very low in mercury, something that can be very concerning to many. Plus, these smaller canned fish are very high in omega-3s, which we hear from scientists are very good for our bodies on so many levels, good for our heart and our blood, among other things. And sardines are especially high in vitamin D, which we also hear from scientists is very important and has been found through various studies to be linked to cancer prevention and bone health. Now, I grew up eating sardines on a regular basis, and they were often served by my mom on rye bread with pickled red onions and then a couple of sardines, and it was delicious. But I definitely understand that that's not for everybody. And sometimes when you are introducing these new foods to yourself, your family, and friends, you have to find ways to incorporate them with a lot of other flavors to make them palatable. And then over time, one's palate finds that they're actually craving them. Now, the recipe I'm sharing today is not my own. I really have to give credit to Katz, and she has a wonderful line of cookbooks. And this particular recipe she calls Good Mood Sardines, because I gather omega-3s are linked to giving us a good mood. And this particular recipe is from her book, The Longevity Kitchen, and I'll be sure to put a link to that below. But she has a whole library of wonderful cookbooks, and they're all related to foods that are very good for your health. And I especially like this book that I mentioned, The Longevity Kitchen, and I like the way her subtitle reads, Satisfying Big Flavor Recipes Featuring the Top 16 Age-Busting Power Foods. Well, we've got one of them here today. Now, I've changed this recipe just a little bit because I'm using what I can find that's in season, but I will go over her exact recipe so that if you are watching this at a particular season when certain herbs are in season, you can use those as well. Now, to get started, what you're going to need is 1 can of sardines, and they can be packed in olive oil or water. Either is fine. And if all you can find are the sardines that are described as like Mediterranean, that usually may have a little tomato sauce or some other seasonings in them, that's fine too. Now, I like to buy the cans of sardines that are the whole little sardines with the skin and the bone intact. The skin and the bones are very nutritious, but the bones are edible, so you don't need to worry. If you've ever had canned salmon, which comes with the skin and the bones in it as well, the bones just crumble right up. But if that at all concerns you, you can certainly look for sardines that are boneless and skinless. Next, you're going to need an onion, and I've got a red onion here. You can use a white onion or a yellow onion. I've made it with all types of onions. You can even use scallions or green onions. Any type of onion will work. Next, you're going to want a lemon, and we're going to use both the juice and the zest. So if you've got an organic lemon, great. If not, don't worry. Normally, if I'm going to be using the zest on a lemon that's not organic, I'll just give it a good little washing with a little baking soda and vinegar, and then give it a good rinse. And then you want a nice big handful of fresh Italian flat leaf parsley. Now, depending what time of year you're making this, you could also add in some fresh basil, you could add in some fresh mint. You basically make this your own. Add in whatever fresh herbs you like. And if you don't have any fresh herbs on hand, don't worry. You can substitute using some dry herbs. And I will be sure to have the printable recipe. I'll put a link in the description below, right underneath this video, that'll take you over to my website, which is also the same name, Mary's Nest. And you'll be able to print out the recipe there or read it online, whatever you like to do. And I'll talk about the amounts of dried herbs that you would need. Next, you're going to want a teaspoon of mustard. This is a Dijon mustard. It's got a nice little spice to it, but again, use whatever you have, whatever you like. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of salt. I've got about 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt here. And I think that it does need a little salt, but if you're on salt-restricted diet and you want to leave it out, by all means leave it out, and then when you go to taste it, you can see if you think it needs a little salt, or even if you need to add a little more than the 1/8 if you are going to be adding that in. Now, I just want to mention one thing. If you are using sardines that are packed in water, it might be helpful to add a little extra olive oil, but it's completely optional. Now, once you get your can of sardines open, you just want to go ahead and start dumping them into a bowl. And you'll see, as I mentioned, see these have the skin on them and they're still intact. We have the whole sardine here, and I'll overlay a picture so that you can see that. And I'm going to go ahead and just add in my olive oil. I'm not going to drain any of it off. These are packed in beautiful extra virgin olive oil, so we don't want to waste any of that. And I think you'll be surprised when you open them, if you've never worked with sardines before. They actually smell quite pleasant, very much of the sea. Now all you want to do is get in your bowl and just start breaking these up. So you're just going to break them up just until they're in little chunks. It's not an exact science. You don't need to be exact. Just what you think looks like, kind of like a little mash. Next, you want to peel your onion and start to chop it up. And you really want to chop it fine, a kind of a nice, almost a mince. Now, the original recipe calls for only 2 tablespoons of chopped onion. But I'm one of those people who, when I do something with onions or a lemon or whatever the case may be, I never use just part of it. I tend to always just use the whole thing, and I find it's usually fine. So what I do in the case of this recipe is try to find a small onion. And that's what I found with this red onion. It was on the small side. Now, don't throw away the skins or the blossom, anything that you cut off that you don't use for this recipe. Put these in a bag, stick them in your fridge or in your freezer, and then use them when you make your bone broth or your vegetable broth. Alrighty, well now I'm going to go ahead and add in my onion. I love red onion. I love any kind of onion. As a matter of fact, my parents tell me when I was a little kid, I used to eat the onions like an apple. So I've actually got about 4 tablespoons as opposed to the original 2 with the original recipe. But I love it. So if you're a real onion lover, by all means, you can double up like I have. Next, you're going to want to take your lemon and use a zester and just get all of that lemon zest down in there. If you notice, it's quite dark behind me, and it's actually only mid-afternoon, but we're having a major thunderstorm here in Central Texas. So if you hear thunder in the background, you'll know what's going on. Now I'm just going to work the seeds out of my lemon, and then we're going to juice the whole lemon in with the sardines. And in goes all this wonderful lemon juice. Well, I've got the lemon juice in there, and I want to mention now, don't throw these out either. Save them in your fridge or your freezer, and when you go to make your bone broth and you need something acidic to acidulate the water that you're soaking your bones in to help start pulling out the gelatin, these can work great. You can just throw them in as is. Now I'm just going to start chopping up this flat leaf Italian parsley, and I like to chop it nice and fine. Now, Rebecca's original recipe calls for a variety of herbs. She's got not only the flat leaf Italian parsley, but she also has a little bit of fresh basil and a little bit of fresh mint. I'm not a fan. I've made it many ways with those herbs as well as others. But I have found that the mint can almost be a little overpowering. It may just be the mint from my garden that's a little overpowering. I have peppermint. But I really like it just with the Italian flat leaf parsley, and the basil is very nice too. But basil's not in season right now. However, if you want to put in a little dried basil, you can certainly do that. But what I recommend for a little tip is to put just a little bit of hot water over your dried basil and let it sit for a little bit. It doesn't exactly reconstitute, but it softens it a bit, and I find it works better in this recipe. Whatever fresh herbs you decide to use, you're looking for about 6 teaspoons worth of fresh herbs. Now, if you were doing dry herbs, you'd want to cut that in half or even a little less than half. But again, I feel with this sort of recipe, it's not an exact science. So really put in as many or as little fresh herbs or dried herbs for that matter as you like. Well, we'll get in the last of our parsley here and we'll mix this all up and give it a taste. Next, we're going to go ahead and add in that 1/8 teaspoon of salt. But as I said, after we taste it, sometimes the sardines can be a little salty. So we'll just put that 1/8 teaspoon and then our 1 teaspoon of the Dijon mustard. And we'll taste it and we'll see if it needs some more salt. And now all we do is just give this a gentle mix up. That's it. It couldn't be easier. Now once you get this all mixed up, you can put it in a little serving bowl and serve it with crackers. It's lovely that way. You could also use this to top a salad. That would be very nice as well. Now, you can eat this right away as is, and the onions will still have a little bit of a crunch to them, or you can let this marinate for a couple of hours or even overnight in your refrigerator. And with the lemon juice, it'll cause a little bit of a pickling of the onions and it'll soften them. Not only their texture, but to a certain extent their flavor. But red onions are nice for this if onions are not something that you're used to, because they always seem to have a nice, at least for me, a little bit of a milder flavor than some of your other onions. But I think like the sweet yellow Vidalia would probably be lovely too. And green onions I think are always great in this. Well, I'm just going to give this a taste right off my spoon, not on a cracker or anything, and I'll tell you how it is. That is really delicious. I know those of you who may not be used to sardines are saying, oh, I don't know. Trust me, try this. I think you're going to really like it. If you'd like more ideas for how to prepare some new foods that you may be finding in your traditional foods pantry, be sure to click on this video over here where I show you how to soak and, if you want, sprout your beans to make them very nutritious and easily digestible. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.